You guys have asked for it. Now it's here. I'm doing my fantasy football rankings for the kicker position for the fantasy football playoffs. Time to win that fantasy football title. Let's get into it right now. What's going on, everybody? My name is Michael Hoff. You can follow me on X at the FF Realist. This is the Face Off Sports Network. And yeah, I'm giving you my kicker rankings for the fantasy football playoffs. This is for week 15, 16, 17, because if you're in fantasy football in week 18, you've been doing it wrong this whole time. So this consists of those 3 weeks. I'm going to run through the list. If you guys have any questions, comments, feel free to fire away in the comments. I'll get to each and every single one of you. Also, just keep in mind, I'm going to continue to do rankings and streamers each week of the fantasy football playoffs. So, but consider this a bit of a template as we go on through this. So let's get into the rankings here. And tier one is going to consist of just a few kickers, but the first one on the list is going to be Jason Myers of the Seattle Seahawks. Strength of schedule is not great, 27th in the NFL. And listen, I want to preface this too. I took a look at some of the weather that's coming up. I tried to look ahead a little bit. One problem is a lot of these games actually are flexed, so we don't know what day they are. Then there's also some of these games are a few weeks away. Weather patterns could change. So I tried my best to throw some weather into this discussion, but there is some possible rain, wind gusts in the first week of the playoffs. There's also some possible rain, low winds in the second week. And then the third and final game at the Panthers is going to be flex. So we don't know what time it's going to be, but there's your schedule right there. But Jason Myers has been on an absolute roll for fantasy, and there isn't much of a reason to suspect that won't continue on the season. The Seahawks are attempting a league high 2.6 field goals on a per game basis. And over the last 3 games, it's been even better, 4 field goal attempts per game. So the Colts, I had mentioned the Colts. It's the first week of the fantasy playoffs. They're allowing the 10th fewest points to the position, but that is way down by, if you go back to the first 2 weeks, they only allowed 4 points in the first 2 weeks combined. Since then, they've allowed an average of 9 points per game. And the Rams and the Panthers are both favorable opponents. So there's no reason to suspect that Jason Myers won't continue to do what he's doing. I've told you guys he's a set of them, forget it. There are better strength of schedules out there, but the opportunity that Jason Myers has been getting, it just outweighs it. So that is my number one kicker. My other kicker in tier one, the second kicker on this list, is Kaimi Fairbairn of the Houston Texans. You look at that there, week 15 against the Cardinals, week 16 against the Raiders, and then week 17, the old swan song for fantasy at the LA Chargers. Almost said San Diego there, but then again, I just said San Diego, so I just did it. Listen, one of the most intriguing aspects of Kaimi Fairbairn's schedule, also, he's got the opportunity. We love to see that, but all 3 of his playoff games for the fantasy football playoffs are going to be indoors. So we'd love to see that. And the schedule really isn't that difficult, too. The Texans, with and without CJ Stroud, have been towards the top of the league in terms of field goal attempts on a per game basis. Fairbairn has only 2 games with fewer than 2 field goal attempts. It's hard to beat that kind of opportunity. I preached that all year on these videos, and, really, you preach that all summer long when you're getting ready to do your drafts. I mean, what are you looking for when you're doing waiver wire for other positions that aren't kickers? What are you looking for? Opportunity. So the 2 kickers here at the top are opportunities abound for both of them. So absolutely love it. So there you go. Actually, I lied to you. There is one more kicker in my tier one. Forgive me. I have lied to you. The last kicker in my tier one, I would do a drum roll, but I don't have a sound drop. It's going to be Evan McPherson of the Cincinnati Bengals. There's the schedule there. Week 15 going up against the Ravens, week 16 at the Dolphins, and then week 17 against the Arizona Cardinals. This is the number one strength of schedule for the fantasy football playoffs. And I mean, McPherson looks like he's going to be taking off. I've gotten some people in my comments. I posted my week 14 streamers and rankings, which you can check out in the archives here. By the way, feel free to like and subscribe this video, week 14 video. But I've been getting a lot of comments about, Joe Burrow's back. It's time to go. And I agree. And if you look at these, week 14, he's just outside my top 12. So some people hate that. But fantasy football playoffs, I mean, over the last 2 weeks, he scored a total of 34 points. I don't love his matchup in week 14, but I love, love, love the fantasy football playoffs. Um, Two of these games will be played outdoors in Cincinnati. And again, it's kind of tough to gauge the weather, some flex games involved in there. But as of now, the weather's looking good for the week 15 matchup, while the week 17, like I just said, has not been scheduled. A lot of these games are going to be flexed again, yada, yada. So keep that in mind. It's going to be a fluctuating situation. But right now, just in the bare bones of it, I love the points that we're seeing from McPherson. And I envision this to be like last year when Joe Burrow was playing, and we're not even trying to get in the playoffs at this point. We know that it's pretty much over for the Bengals, but Joe Burrow is going to continue to go out there. He's going to continue to ball. They're going to play spoiler, and I think that Evan McPherson is going to benefit from that from a fantasy football points perspective. Again, the number one schedule is Mr. Evan McPherson. That rounds out tier one. We'll go into tier two now, and tier two is going to start off with, listen, was not on my bingo card for him to be one of my favorite kickers in the fantasy football playoffs before the season started. But Andy Borregales, by the way, was one of my streamers last night on Monday Night Football, put up double-digit points. He does now. This is the thing with Andy Borregales. If you want to pick him up or if you have him already, he does have a week 14 bye. So you got to look at the perspective of potentially carrying two kickers if you don't want to drop Borregales. Um, I would tell you personally, if I could, I would. I actually am doing it in one league because I'd like to hang on to him for the fantasy football playoffs. The second easiest schedule. I pulled up the schedule earlier. I'll pull it back up again. He's going up against the Buffalo Bills in week 15, at the Ravens, and then at the Jets. So if we're taking a look at this here, it's two of his opponents. I apologize here. That's what I was trying to get to. Two of his opponents here are in the top three in points allowed to the position. That's the biggest thing. That being your week 16 and week 17 matchup with the Baltimore Ravens and the New York Jets. Again, these are outdoor games, so we want to take a look at the weather. But to me, if you're trying to wrap up a fantasy football championship, and again, I'm going to put these videos out for each week, but week 16 and 17, Andy Borregales, spoiler alert, he's going to be towards the top of my rankings for each of those weeks. So absolutely love it. And, much like Evan McPherson, Borregales has been on a roll lately. I already mentioned what he did on Monday Night Football, double-digit points, but over the last 2 weeks, he's put up 31 points in total. So Andy Borregales is my fourth-ranked kicker. My last kicker in tier two. So I've got 3 kickers in tier one, 2 in tier two. It's going to be Chase McLaughlin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Week 15 going up against the Atlanta Falcons. Week 16 at the Carolina Panthers. And then week 17 at the Miami Dolphins. He's also, by the way, McLaughlin, if you're looking at week 14, again, you can watch my video, but he's high ranked there too. He's a top 3 kicker for me this week coming up. But McLaughlin's schedule here is the 13th easiest. But the thing that I love here is, I read off the opponents to you. He's not heading towards the Northeast, so he gets to avoid all that weather. He only had 5 points against the Falcons back in week 1. That would be the first week of the playoffs, his first opponent. But important to note though that the Falcons lately have been allowing a lot of points. The Falcons currently heading into the fantasy football playoffs have allowed double-digit points to kickers in 4 out of the last 7 weeks, and in McLaughlin's previous 4 games against the Atlanta Falcons, he's averaging 10.5 points. So the points are there. So I like McLaughlin to produce here. I had told you guys there was a lot of rough weeks. I'd gotten a lot of comments on YouTube, and I said better days were ahead. The better days start in week 14 and go all the way through the fantasy football playoffs. So Chase McLaughlin, lock it up. Let's roll. I'm getting into tier 3 here, and tier 3 is going to start off with Eddie Pinheiro. And the only reason why he's not tier 2 is just because we're going on what Kyle Shanahan said yesterday. Keep in mind, much like the New England Patriots, San Francisco 49ers are on bye in week 14. Kyle Shanahan did say that he expects or hopes that Pinheiro will be back. Pinheiro did have a couple weeks off with that injured hamstring. Um, provided that happens, I expect Pinheiro to pick up right where he left off. And need I remind you, everybody loved him, but let's not forget that when Pinheiro was in the lineup for the 49ers, he was the second best kicker in fantasy with 96 points. That was only 3 points behind Jason Myers. So it's also worth mentioning that over the last 3 weeks, the Titans and the Colts, which are also opponents for Eddie Pinheiro, over the last 3 weeks are in the top 10 in points allowed to the position. So we've got that there. We've got a lot of points being allowed in the short term. We want to look at what they've done over the season, but we also want to look at recency because some guys are going to break late. There's some kickers at the back end of my rankings here who I like because they've broken late, and I expect that to continue on through the rest of the season. But for now, my number 6 kicker might as well be tier 2, but he's just at the top of tier 3. It's going to be Eddie Pinheiro. And yeah, I don't expect him to move much further. I love the opportunity that he's going to get. Let's get into my 7th ranked kicker, and that's going to be Brandon Aubrey of the Dallas Cowboys. I know people think it's weird he's not in tier 1, but we got to be realists on this one. Brandon Aubrey's going up against the Vikings in week 15, then the Chargers in week 16, and then at the Commanders in week 17. And listen, while he's a worthwhile fantasy option, he's just not top tier. And again, we expected that all year. And I said it in the week 14 video. Jason Myers is everything we wanted Brandon Aubrey to be. But talking about Eddie Pinheiro earlier, Aubrey's schedule is even more favorable. He plays 2 teams that are in the top 5 in points allowed over the last 3 weeks. So we'd love to see that. And, as I've discussed many a times lately, the only problem here is the field goal attempts, the field goal opportunities. That's the only reason why Aubrey is as low as he is. Last season, the Cowboys were number 1 in attempts on a per game basis for field goals. This season, they're in the middle of the league. So that's a bit of a drop off, and that's a drop off that not a lot of people were expecting. Either way, I still think Brandon Aubrey, you could do a lot worse with kickers than Brandon Aubrey. So the separation between him and Eddie Pinheiro is simply because of that. It's because of opportunities. So let me lock in Brandon Aubrey. I'll flash that graphic one more time as my 7th ranked kicker. Let's get into the last kicker in tier 3. And I got a little bit of heat because he's not really doing too well in my week 14 rankings, but Cameron Dicker, the kicker. He is currently ranked as my 8th ranked kicker for the fantasy football playoffs, going up against Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City in week 15, week 16 at the Dallas Cowboys, and then week 17 home against the Houston Texans. So to me, Cameron Dicker represents one of the biggest wild cards in my rankings because we've seen what he can do when everybody's healthy, when he's getting the opportunity, so on and so forth. But I've got to take a look at this. I mean, the Chargers have had losses to the offensive line. We have to see how Justin Herbert's hand does. And the strength of schedule for Cameron Dicker is the 4th worst for the fantasy football playoffs. So in the championship week, he goes up against the Houston Texans, who, you guys have heard me talk about the Texans a lot. The Texans are tied with 6 games of allowing less than 5 points of the kicking position. So that's pretty difficult to really rely on in terms of fantasy football playoffs. But, all that said, much like his week 14 ranking, I don't think you need to heavily panic about Cameron Dicker if you have him. If there's some of those names above available, if you want to ride with them, you can put it into the comments and I'll tell you. But I still think Cameron Dicker's worth using. And if Justin Herbert turns out to be just fine, if the ball's moving, then you still have house money with Cameron Dicker. So don't get it twisted. I still like Cameron Dicker. He's just ranked 8th because of uncertainty. And again, this thing's going to fluctuate throughout the fantasy football playoffs. Let's get into tier 4, and tier 4's got some surprises, at least for me. Jake Moody is my first kicker in tier 4, the number 9 ranked kicker for the fantasy football playoffs. Week 15, he's at the Giants, and then home for the last 2 weeks, home against the Eagles, home against the Cowboys. I know he's wearing wearing Bears gear there in that photo, but he is actually a member of the Washington Commanders. But when he was kicking for the Bears, he kicked for the Bears for 2 weeks while Cairo Santos was injured. He went ahead and he put up 13.5 points averaged over those 2 games. And then week 14, he came in, this week 13, he came in, I apologize, and he scored 8 points. So we like that as well. I think the potential's there. He's hit ever since he's left San Francisco. I know there was a lot of woes there in San Francisco, me being a 49ers fan too. I know he needed a change of scenery. Since that change of scenery in 3 games, not playing for the 49ers, he's hit 93.7% of his kicks. And again, the schedule is the fourth easiest strength of schedule here. It's just going to be a matter of what the weather is going to look like for those weeks. I mean, so he's kicking outdoors in all 3 games. So a little bit tough to check the weather. We do have a flex game in there as well, but yeah. So Jake Moody of the Washington Commanders kicks off my tier 4 as my ninth ranked kicker. We get to my 10th ranked kicker. This is probably one of the biggest disappointments. It's Tyler Loop, Mr. Snoopaloop. And I say disappointment because, listen, prior to this, if it was a few weeks ago, if I did this video, Tyler Loop would have been so high. Even though it's the schedule is 19th, what he was able to do there in that short span. But then week 13 happened, and Lamar Jackson underperforming, likely playing hurt, resulted in Loop getting little to no opportunities, scored just 2 points on Thanksgiving night. That's not how we wanted to tap off our holiday. But, you know, also for as good as Loop has been among kickers that are in the top 5 in scoring, I'm sorry, among kickers in the top 12 in scoring. Let me get my words out there. Loop leads the group with 4 games of less than 5 points. So that tells you that Loop is either playing great and scoring double digits, or he's putting you in a spot where he's getting less than 5 points. So when we're talking about that, and that's stuff that was happening even earlier before the Lamar Jackson injury. So when we're talking about that 19th strength of schedule, I'm just going to put a little bit of caution on this one. That's why Tyler Loop is going to be my 10th ranked kicker. One of the surprises I told you, I thought Jake Moody was going to be a surprise in my top 12 for the fantasy football playoffs. The other surprise is at 11, it's Riley Patterson of the Miami Dolphins at the Steelers in week 15. And then it's going to be home against Cincinnati Bengals and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, the only real potential weather worry we have is going to be against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It is on paper the 12th easiest schedule. And listen, it's in his and I mentioned this in the week 14 video because he is a streamer for me. So in his last 6 games, Riley Patterson is averaging 3 more points on a per game basis on the last 6 games than he was in the first 6 games. So we're getting the Dolphins. I mean, even though they didn't play great offensively last week, Patterson was still in a position where he was delivering in terms of points for his fantasy football team. Um, the weather is currently looking good in that Steelers matchup I mentioned. It's going to be at the Steelers. That's actually going to be a Monday night football game. Currently, that looks good. That is the opener for the fantasy football playoffs. And the Steelers are also one of 7 teams to allow over 115 points to kickers. So it's not a terrible matchup there. Next to Jake Moody, Patterson's one of my low-key favorites to surprise people. So Patterson's going to stay there at number 11. My last ranked kicker, rounding out my fantasy football playoff rankings for the kicking position, is Harrison Butker. And I got to be honest, it went down to guys like Butker and Cairo Santos and Chris Boswell. But I know we're all worried about Boswell and the quarterbacks and what's been going on there. And really, Harrison has the best strength of schedule between those guys. So 15th in terms of strength of schedule, going up against the Chargers. I'll flash that graphic again. Is going to be home against the Chargers in week 15, then at the Tennessee Titans, and then home against the Denver Broncos to close out the year. In his previous game against the Chargers, Butker scored 11 points, and he had 7 points against the Broncos back in week 11. So those aren't terrible outings. Then there's the other game against the Titans, who are allowing the 10th most points to the position. So, and they've allowed double-digit points in 3 out of the last 4 weeks. So I think this is a nice little prospect here of Harrison Butker breaking late, but that's going to do it, guys. That's my top 12 rankings for the fantasy football playoffs. If you have any questions or comments, fire it into the chat. But that's going to do it. So, guys, let's ride. Until next time, stay thirsty, be kind to one another. We'll catch you on the flip side, and cheers.